I've had my Canon C200 for about 18 months now, so I thought it was about time I did a little mini review. So the first thing I want to talk about is the autofocus. And the camera actually has two face detection modes. It has face priority and face only. And that second option for me locks on focus onto the subject's face and never lets go. Now, I recently shot a music video on the C200 and we had the camera on a track and we were dollying in and out and using the C200's autofocus to maintain critical focus on the face of the performers. And it worked incredibly well. This is Canon's 50mm f1.8 STM lens. And the autofocus with this lens is really, really good. The focus transitions look like you've got a manual focus puller on the job. It's very smooth, it's very organic, and it looks really natural. And if you take some of Canon's more affordable STM zoom lenses like this 55 to 250mm STM lens, not only does it have that really good autofocus, it has really good image stabilization, and optically it's quite impressive. I think it costs less than £200 now. These lenses are not to be sniffed at. I would definitely consider these. So the next thing I want to talk about with the C200 is its auto exposure capability. Now, unlike their DSLR and mirrorless cameras, it doesn't have auto ISO, but it does have auto iris. The unfortunate thing is that that functionality only works with a select number of compatible lenses. I'll come on to what those lenses are in just a second, but I wanted to talk briefly about how I use auto iris. What I'll do is I'll open the aperture manually so that it's wide open at the darkest part of the scene, and then activate the auto iris functionality, and as the camera moves into the brighter parts of the scene, the camera will control the iris and close it down so that it maintains correct exposure. One tip I do have is to set the camera's exposure compensation to +0.5 or +0.75 EV. That's because, from my experience, the camera tends to underexpose by about that value. Okay, so which lenses are compatible with auto iris? Well, as I said before, unfortunately, it's not very many. There are only 3 or 4 that I know of. The first of which is this one. This is the 10 to 18 STM lens with image stabilization, the 18 to 135 STM with image stabilization, the 55 to 250mm lens that I've mentioned previously, and there's one other that I no longer have, and that's the 85mm f1.4L with image stabilization. As far as I know, it's the only prime lens that has compatibility with the C200's auto iris. It does seem quite strange to me that Canon have developed this feature in the C200 and then not supported it in many of the lenses. So moving on to audio. Now, you probably already know that the C200 has 2 channels of professional XLR microphone inputs. So we've got one here and one here. But what you probably don't know is that there is a secondary input here. This is a typical stereo jack input that you'll find on a lot of DSLR and mirrorless cameras, and the C200 is actually capable of recording 4 channels of audio simultaneously by using both the stereo jack and the 2 XLR inputs at the same time. The preamps are reasonably good quality. They're definitely a step up from their DSLR and mirrorless cameras, but certainly good enough for recording interviews and things of that nature. So the next thing I want to talk about is the built-in neutral density or ND filters. I think built-in ND filters are probably one of the main reasons why many people will consider a switch from a DSLR or mirrorless camera to a cinema camera like the C200. So the ND filters on the C200 are engaged electronically, and you can activate them with these buttons here, and it goes up to 10 stops. And I think once you get used to having built-in ND filters, it's very difficult to go back. So what's about that all-important image quality? Well, for me, it does have a very pleasing image. It actually makes people look quite healthy. It has a very flattering look to skin tones. It doesn't have that overly sharpened look that some cameras can suffer from. It's very natural, and you might describe it as being quite cinematic or filmic. And the sensor does have a sweet spot, so you do need to expose it carefully, and I'll come on to that in just a second. The camera can record in either 8-bit video or in Canon's Cinema Raw Lite. For me, the 8-bit files look really good. I don't necessarily think there's a need to record in RAW unless you're going to do an awful lot of color grading in post-production. Now, in order for those 8-bit files to look at their best, you do need to expose the image properly in camera. Now, my advice here is to use the C-Log 3 profile and use a gray card and expose the gray card so that it sits just under 40 IRE on the Waveform Monitor. And the camera actually has a handy feature in the Waveform Monitor setup. You can actually set it to line and spot, and this makes a portion of it red so that you can see more clearly where your gray card is exposed to. So I've talked about what I like about the camera. What is it that I don't like about it? Now, I'm not a huge fan of the sticky out viewfinder here. Not because it's poor quality in any way, but just because when I'm holding a camera, I like to keep it very close to my body so that I'm more stable with it. With that viewfinder, I find I'm having to hold the camera a little bit further away and I'm therefore less stable. So I do wish that that viewfinder was integrated into the body more, or even just a little bit shorter. Another thing is there are no custom preset memories. So on other cameras, typically you can store things like the recording format, the frame rate, the white balance, the picture profile, all of that kind of stuff. You can save them to a preset memory so that if you're recording in different scenes, you can call up one of those presets quickly with a flick of a switch. The C200 doesn't have that, so every time your scene changes, you have to manually set up all of those things. So the next thing is its ISO performance, which actually isn't too bad. So this probably isn't a negative, it's just not a positive. I find it gets noisy above about ISO 6400, and these days there are much better cameras for filming in low light. So the last thing I want to talk about is the battery life. And the camera comes with this sized battery. This is a BPA30. Now, on my previous Canon C100 Mark II, the same sized battery, it's a different battery, but it's the same size, would last me about 4 hours off a full charge. On the C200, I find this battery only lasts about 2 hours. You can get a bigger battery. This is the BPA60. It's twice as big and obviously has twice the capacity and lasts twice as long. But it's really expensive, and it kind of sticks out the back of the camera, so it can be a little bit unwieldy to use. Overall, it's a great camera. It's just not the right camera for every shoot. That's it from me for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.